So the question is, when did Abraham and Jesus see each other? And where in the Old Testament can we find it? That's how you're going to prove Jesus is Jehovah. Because remember what Justin Martyr said? He said, the God who appeared to Abraham was Jesus Christ, not the Father. So, but if you read the Old Testament, like in Genesis 17:1, it says, Jehovah appeared to Abraham. He says, walk before me blameless. I'm God Almighty. Or if you go to Genesis 18, Jehovah and two angels.
Was Yeshua the angel in the burning bush? Let's take a look. Let's read Exodus 3:2. And the angel of Yahweh appeared to him, Moses, in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. Verse 6, and he, this angel, said, I am the Elohim of your father, the Elohim of Abraham, Elohim of Isaac, and Elohim of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at Elohim. So was this simply an angel, or the second person of a trinity, perhaps the pre-existent Yeshua?
There's an extra special moment happening here. And Genesis 22 is one of those moments. In the end, you'll see that this passage is like a 3D prophecy. It's an event that becomes a prophecy that is later fulfilled in Jesus Christ.
Genesis 49:10, until Shiloh comes. This verse is huge when studying the prophecies of the Messiah in the Tanakh, otherwise known as the Old Testament, and using it to identify who it is. Let's get started.
The New Testament character of Christ does not exist within the Hebrew Scriptures. Attempting to insert him within the Old Testament leads to a multitude of issues, from contradicting the Hebrew Scriptures to contradicting the New Testament writings as well. Placing Christ in the Old Testament would require a number of excuses, thinking methods, and outlandish reasonings as to why this character is absent from the Hebrew text. We'll start by revisiting Daniel chapter 9. Verse 25. Know and understand this, from the time the word goes out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the Anointed One, the ruler, comes, there will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens. It will be rebuilt with streets and a trench, but in times of trouble. In the first video, I simply said this was referring to King Cyrus of Persia, without any further expansion upon that. There is much more important background information that further solidifies this claim. Know and understand this, from the time the word goes out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the Anointed One, the ruler, comes, there will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens. It will be rebuilt with streets and a trench, but in times of trouble. After the 62 sevens, the Anointed One will be put to death and will have nothing. The people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will come like a flood, war will continue until the end, and desolations have been decreed. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7. In the middle of the 7 he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. And at the temple he will set up an abomination that causes desolation, until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. The context around Daniel 9 is the prophet's confusion regarding earlier prophecies made by Jeremiah regarding periods of 70 years. There are 2 70-year periods that are described in Jeremiah chapter 25. 25 verse 13. And it shall come to pass, when 70 years are accomplished, that I will punish the king of Babylon, and that nation, saith Yahuwah, for their iniquity, and the land of the Chaldeans, and will make it perpetual desolations. Jeremiah 29:10. For thus saith Yahuwah, that after 70 years be accomplished at Babylon, I will visit you, and perform my good word toward you, and causing you to return to this place. These 2 70-year periods overlap with each other for a duration of 50 years, before Jerusalem was to be rebuilt. This is important to remember, given the circumstances during the life of Daniel. It's also worth noting that the text in Daniel 9 doesn't say the Anointed One was killed. This Anointed One was just simply cut off, or removed. It's also important to understand that there are actually 2 Anointed Ones being mentioned within these verses. The first of these Anointed Ones is King Cyrus of Persia, who is called the Prince. We can verify that he is an Anointed One using the words of the prophet Isaiah. Isaiah 45 verse 1. This is what Yahuwah says to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I take hold of to subdue nations before him. We can also verify that Cyrus was the Anointed One who was to give the command to rebuild Jerusalem in the chapter prior. Isaiah 44:28. who says of Cyrus, "He is my shepherd and will accomplish all that I please. He will say of Jerusalem, let it be rebuilt, and of the temple, let its foundations be laid." The second anointed is not called the prince. This second anointed one is the priesthood, as the high priest and other lower-level priests have to be anointed in order to serve. This anointed can't be physically killed, as it's a system, but you can cut it off or halt it. In the Hebrew text, the second anointed is not called the Messiah or the anointed, just Messiah or anointed, which does not signify it as one specific individual. In Daniel 9, 1 week is equated to a 7-year period. The 7 weeks in verse 25 are separate from the 62 weeks that is mentioned right after it. If it was included, it would have said 69 weeks. The 7 weeks, which equate to 49 years, is the time in between the destruction of the first temple by Babylon and the command given by Cyrus to rebuild the temple. This can be verified in the book of Ezra, chapter 1. In the first year of Cyrus king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of Yahuwah spoken by Jeremiah, Yahuwah moved the heart of Cyrus king of Persia to make a proclamation throughout his realm and also to put it in writing. This is what Cyrus king of Persia says. Yahuwah, the Elohim of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has appointed me to build a temple for him at Jerusalem in Judah. Any of his people among you may go up to Jerusalem in Judah and build the temple of Yahuwah, the Elohim of Israel, the Elohim who is in Jerusalem, and may their Elohim be with them. And in any locality where survivors may now be living, the people are to provide them with silver and gold, with goods and livestock, and with freewill offerings for the temple of Elohim in Jerusalem. Here, we have the first anointed, Cyrus, assisting with the reinstatement of the second anointed, the Levitical priesthood system, as offerings for the temple are mentioned. The first temple was destroyed in the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, which we can read about in Jeremiah 52, 12-14. On the 10th day of the 5th month, in the 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon, Nebuzaradan commander of the imperial guard, who served the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem. He set fire to the temple of Yahuwah, the royal palace and all the houses of Jerusalem. Every important building he burned down. The whole Babylonian army, under the commander of the imperial guard, broke down all the walls around Jerusalem. These 19 years were the first 19 years of the 70 years that were mentioned in Jeremiah 25 and 13. Now, we have to add the roughly 50-year overlap, the 49 years, that are mentioned in Daniel 9. We get roughly 70 years, 68 to be exact. But roughly isn't good enough. We have to get exactly 70 years. In Cyrus's first year, he gave the instruction to rebuild Jerusalem and the temple. But Cyrus wasn't the first ruler over Babylon after its demise. Darius the Mede was. Darius the Mede reigned for 2 years, which scholars date from 538 to 536 BC, adding his 2-year reign to the 68 years prior to King Cyrus. We reach exactly 70 years that is mentioned in Jeremiah 25. The 7-week, 49-year period within this 70-year time frame is the 7 weeks until the Messiah the Prince, Cyrus, arrives. This time period wasn't leading up to Christ's arrival, but to King Cyrus. The 62-week period mentioned in Daniel 9 is when the second Messiah or anointed was in place. As mentioned earlier, this anointed was the anointed priesthood which was eventually cut off. According to scholars, Christ was supposedly crucified around the year 30 CE. The destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans was in the year 70 CE. This raises an issue, because Daniel 9:27 states that a new prince, now the Roman authority, will cause sacrifice and oblation to cease in the middle of 1 week, 1 7-year period, after the anointed is cut off. If the temple was destroyed around the time of Christ's death, it should have occurred within the range of the years 33 to 36 CE, as the middle of a 1-week period of 7 years is roughly 3.5 years. Instead, it occurs in the year 70. This sacrifice and oblation that was ceased was the priesthood, who were in charge of the sacrifices and oblations being cut off, or removed when the temple was destroyed in 70 CE. A thorough examination of prophecy, history, and chronology displays this chapter in the book of Daniel to be discussing the re-establishment of the holy city, temple, and anointed priesthood through the rise of the anointed Messiah, King Cyrus of Persia. This prophecy made by Daniel has nothing to do with a New Testament Messiah. Yet another method that Christians use to insert their Messiah into the Hebrew Scriptures is using the phrase, the angel of the Lord. It is a growing practice for Christians to claim whenever this angel of the Lord is mentioned, or any angel in the Old Testament for that matter, that it is truly Christ appearing to mankind. The first, and most used, instance where this phrase is mentioned is in Genesis 18, in the story of Abraham. Starting at verse 1, Yahuwah appeared to Abraham near the great trees of Mamre while he was sitting at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day. Abraham looked up and saw 3 men standing nearby. When he saw them, he hurried from the entrance of his tent to meet them and bowed low to the ground. Skipping to verse 22. The men turned away and went toward Sodom, but Abraham remained standing before Yahuwah. Verse 33. When Yahuwah had finished speaking with Abraham, he left, and Abraham returned home. Not only does the Christian faith claim Christ to be present here, but it claims the entire Christian Trinity is present, due to the mention of the Creator visiting Abraham in the form of 3 men. There are a number of different contradictions that this belief runs into. All of these men were truly angels, and they were simply messengers who were speaking in the first person from whom they were sent. They were acting as mouthpieces for the Creator. This is a method that is used all throughout Scripture, mainly by individuals in positions of power. Isaiah chapter 36, 1-7. In the 14th year of King Hezekiah's reign, Sennacherib king of Assyria attacked all the fortified cities of Judah and captured them. Then the king of Assyria sent his field commander with a large army from Lachish to King Hezekiah at Jerusalem. When the commander stopped at the aqueduct of the upper pool, on the road to the launderer's field, Eliakim son of Hilkiah the palace administrator, Shebna the secretary, and Joah son of Asaph the recorder went out to him. The field commander said to them, "Tell Hezekiah, this is what the great king, the king of Assyria, says. On what are you basing this confidence of yours? You say you have counsel and might for war, but you speak only empty words. On whom are you depending, that you rebel against me? Look, I know you are depending on Mitzrayim, that splintered reed of a staff, which pierces the hand of anyone who leans on it. Such is Pharaoh king of Mitzrayim to all who depend on him. But if you say to me, we are depending on Yahuwah our Elohim, isn't he the one whose high places and altars Hezekiah removed, saying to Judah and Jerusalem, you must worship before this altar? Here, the Assyrian field commander is speaking, but he's not conveying his own words. He's conveying the words of the king of Assyria, Sennacherib. In this excerpt, whenever the first-person pronoun, I, is mentioned, it is referring to the king of Assyria, and not the field commander, though he is speaking. This can also be observed in the prophet Isaiah's response to this Assyrian threat. Chapter 37, 5-7. When King Hezekiah's officials came to Isaiah, Isaiah said to them, Tell your master, this is what Yahuwah says. Do not be afraid of what you have heard, those words with which the underlings of the king of Assyria have blasphemed me. Listen. When he hears a certain report, I will make him want to return to his own country, and there I will have him cut down with the sword. Here, Isaiah is speaking, though he is not conveying his own message. He is conveying the message of the Creator. Even though Isaiah orally says, I will make him want to return to his own country, and there I will have him cut down with the sword, he isn't the one who will actually be doing it. Yahuwah is. He is only using Isaiah as his mouthpiece, his messenger. This method of communication is also used in chapter 7 of the same book. Verses 3 and 4. Then Yahuwah said to Isaiah, Go out, you and your son Shear-Jashub, to meet Ahaz at the end of the aqueduct of the upper pool, on the road to the launderer's field. Say to him, Be careful, keep calm, and don't be afraid. Do not lose heart because of these 2 smoldering stubs of firewood, because of the fierce anger of Rezin and Aram and of the son of Remaliah. Verse 10. Again Yahuwah spoke to Ahaz, Ask Yahuwah your Elohim for a sign, whether in the deepest depths or in the highest heights. Verses 3 and 4 indicated that Isaiah was the one who was speaking to King Ahaz, while verse 10 states, Yah was the speaker. This is for the same reason. Yahuwah was the speaker, but he was speaking through the prophet Isaiah. Isaiah was the vessel through which the Creator was speaking to King Ahaz. This method of communication is the same in Genesis 18. Yahuwah was the speaker, only he was speaking through the 3 men who appeared to Abraham. These men were later revealed to be angels in the next chapter. Genesis 19:1. The 2 angels arrived at Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gateway of the city. The Hebrew word for angel, malach, translates to king, angel, or messenger. This makes sense, because angels were often sent to mankind as messengers on behalf of the Creator. They were also used as supernatural representations of the Creator on earth. This can be verified in the book of Exodus chapter 3, regarding Moses and the burning bush. Verse 2. There the angel of Yahuwah appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Verse 6. Then he said, I am the Elohim of your father, the Elohim of Abraham, the Elohim of Isaac, and the Elohim of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face, because he was afraid to look at Elohim. This wasn't actually Yah, but it was an angel who was sent as a representative and a messenger on behalf of Yah. This fact can be proven within the same book. Exodus 33 and 20. But, he said, you cannot see my face, for no one may see me and live. Moses saw this angel, and though he was afraid to look at it, continued to live. Therefore, it wasn't actually Yahuwah. This is where the Christian interpretation of Genesis 18 begins to fall apart. Going back to verse 22, as well as chapter 19, it states that the two angels left the presence of Abraham, and Yahuwah remained standing with him. If Abraham was able to distinctly identify three figures, with one of them being labeled as the Creator, then, by reasoning, Abraham would have laid his eyes upon Yahuwah. He should have died. Why didn't he? Because that angel wasn't actually Yah, just a representation of him. He was already in the presence of Yahuwah when the three angels first appeared, because all three angels were representatives of Yah. When the first two angels left, Abraham was still in the presence of Yahuwah, because there was one more angelic representative that remained with him. This proves that these three men, or angels, are not the Trinity, as some Christians claim. One angel would have been God the Father. Abraham would have seen him, and Abraham would have died. Secondly, this cannot be referring to the Trinity, because Christ would have been one of these angels. This is in direct contradiction to the Christian scriptures itself. Hebrews chapter 1, verses 3 through 8. The Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. After he had provided purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty in heaven. So he became as much superior to the angels as the name he has inherited is superior to theirs. For to which of the angels did God ever say, You are my son, today I have become your father? Or again, I will be his father, and he will be my son. And again, when God brings his firstborn in the world, he says, Let all God's angels worship him. And speaking of the angels, he says, He makes his angels spirits, and his servants flames of fire. But about the Son he says, Your throne, O God, will last forever and ever, a scepter of justice will be the scepter of your kingdom. According to the book of Hebrews, Christ is not an angel. He is supposedly above them. The belief that Christ was one of the three men present in Genesis 18 not only directly contradicts Christianity's own writings, but it lowers the status of their Messiah by placing him on the same level as the angels, whom the New Testament says he is above. This is also present in Exodus chapter 23, verse 20. See, I am sending an angel ahead of you to guard you along the way and to bring you to the place I have prepared. Pay attention to him and listen to what he says. Do not rebel against him, he will not forgive your rebellion, since my name is in him. If you listen carefully to what he says and do all that I say, I will be an enemy to your enemies and will oppose those who oppose you. My angel will go ahead of you and bring you into the land of the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Canaanites, Hivites, and Jebusites, and I will wipe them out. This section is also used by Christian apologetic to claim that this angel was truly Christ, and he was present during the Exodus. The explanation for this is the same as in Genesis 18. Yahuwah placing his name in the angel is the same as the angel in Genesis, who is referred to by the Creator's name. This angel was used by the Creator as a representative of himself, which is why he tells Moses to listen carefully to what he says and do all that I say. This angel is used by the Most High as a vessel through which his words are conveyed. Also, we must point out what the Most High states about this angel in Exodus. Do not rebel against him, he will not forgive your rebellion. Which also means, do not sin against him, he will not forgive your sins. This angel will not be able to forgive the sins of the people, as only the Creator is capable of doing that. According to the New Testament, Christ is not only able to verbally forgive sins himself, but he died for the forgiveness of all sins. If Christianity claims this angel is truly Christ, they would once again be contradicting their own writings. Another example can be found in Genesis 32, with the story of Jacob wrestling the angel. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with all Elohim and with humans and have overcome." Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw all Elohim face to face, and yet my life was spared." Some branches of Christianity like to claim this man to be Christ, as the chapter calls him a man, and Jacob claims to see the face of all Elohim. Though Genesis claims this figure is a man, we can truly find out what it was in the book of Hosea. Chapter 12, verses 3 and 4. In the womb he grasped his brother's heel, as a man he struggled with all Elohim. He struggled with the angel, and overcame him. He wept and begged for his favor. He found him at Bethel and talked with him there. Again, just like Genesis 18, this figure is first called a man, and then later clarified to be an angel. Again, this is a strike against Christ, reason being that this entity is identified as an angel, which would contradict Hebrews 1. Also, Jacob reacts the same way that Moses reacts when they encounter an angel. Because of what the Creator says in Exodus 33 and 20, "You cannot see my face, for no one may see me and live," we can again conclude that this angel wasn't actually Yahuwah, since Jacob saw this angel and continued to live as well. This angel, however, had to have a different form, the form of a man, since Jacob was able to physically interact with it. This isn't the only time an angel had taken on a more carnal appearance. In the book of Joshua, we read how the prophet is visited by a spiritual entity. Now when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua went up to him and asked, "Are you for us, or for our enemies?" "Neither," he replied, "but as commander of the army of Yahuwah I have now come." Then Joshua fell face down to the ground and worshipped, and asked him, "What message does my Lord have for his servant?" The commander of Yahuwah's army replied, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." And Joshua did so. There are a few things to point out here. Once again, this entity is first identified as a man, and later clarified to be an angel, just like Genesis chapters 18 and 32. Also, it's worth pointing out that the last phrase spoken by this angel in verse 15 is the same phrase spoken by the angel to Moses in Exodus chapter 3. There is also a mistranslation within this section. The Hebrew word for worshipped in this text, shakah, means to bow down or pay reverence to, not worship. Surely you can bow down during worship, but the word itself does not strictly mean to worship. This word also appears in Genesis 42:6. Now Joseph was the governor of the land, the person who sold grain to all its people. So when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. Here, the same word shakah is used. Joseph's brothers didn't worship him like he was the creator, rather they bowed and paid reverence to him. This can also be seen in Genesis 33. Jacob looked up and there was Esau, coming with his 400 men, so he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the 2 female servants. He put the female servants and their children in front, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph in the rear. He himself went on ahead and bowed down to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. The word shakah is used here as well. Jacob didn't worship his brother Esau 7 times. He bowed down and paid respect to him 7 times. In the book of Joshua, Joshua doesn't worship this angel, rather he bowed and paid respect to him, just as a man pays respect to someone in a higher position than him. Joshua surely didn't worship this angel, because the worship of angels goes directly against the commandments that were just received during the Israelites camping at Mount Sinai. We are not to worship angels, only the Most High. We also know that this wasn't Yahuwah himself, because Joshua refers to the angel as Adoni, which translates to my master, or my superior. It's always used to acknowledge one of a higher status or position, just as the angel is to him. This word, shaka, is also used in Genesis 18, with Abraham and the angels. Verse 2. Abraham looked up and saw 3 men standing nearby. When he saw them, he hurried from the entrance of his tent to meet them and bowed low to the ground. Again, Abraham didn't worship these men, or angels, like they were Yahuwah. Rather, he recognized they were of a higher status than him and paid them respect. These angels in Genesis 18 were representations of Yahuwah, while the angel in the book of Joshua strictly identifies himself as the commander of the army of Yahuwah. Through this self-identification, the angel distinguishes himself from being the creator, since he clarifies himself as being the commander of his army, and not actually him. The book of Daniel also involves a spiritual entity taking on a somewhat human form. Chapter 3, verses 24 and 25. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, "Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?" They replied, "Certainly, your majesty." He said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." A large number of Christian apologetic believe this individual to once again be a pre-incarnate Christ. Using the same logic as the past examples, we can easily deduce what this being truly is. Step 1. How is it identified? King Nebuchadnezzar calls it a man. Step 2. Does this description change? Nebuchadnezzar then says this man looks like a son of the gods. Instantly, this being goes from a man to something more than a man. Something that resembles a divine being. 3. Can people see this being and live? Yes, everyone involved can see it. All continue to live afterwards. Therefore, this being is not the creator. 4. Is the identification of this being changed? Yes. Verse 28. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the Elohim of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants." This being went from a man, to a son of the gods, to finally an angel. 5. Could this be Christ? No, as Hebrews 1 states that Christ is not an angel. What else does Hebrews chapter 1 state? Verses 1 and 2. In the past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets at many times and in various ways, but in these last days he has spoken to us by his Son. The New Testament states that our Creator never spoke through his supposed Son until the latter days, or until the authorship of the New Testament itself. This one statement, again, nullifies any theory or argument that the angel of Yahuwah was actually Christ. Once again, the New Testament not only contradicts the Tanakh, but it is also seen contradicting the claims of the Christian religion. In conclusion, every time the phrase "the angel of Yahuwah" is mentioned, that is exactly what it is. An angel. Nothing more. Going back to the book of Genesis, there is another prophecy that is attributed to Christ, within chapter 49. Verse 10. The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until Shiloh come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his. The context of this chapter is centered around Jacob blessing his children while lying on his deathbed. His son Judah is given the biggest blessing out of all of the brothers. The blessing that he receives is rulership until Shiloh comes. For Christians, the word Shiloh is interpreted to mean there is always a king in Judah, and it also refers to a New Testament Messiah who would serve as an eternal king. The text shouldn't be interpreted that there will always be a king, but rather, whenever there is a king, he would be descended from the tribe of Judah. We can verify this easily, as there was a 500-year span during the Second Temple period that Judah was without a king. This time frame lasted from the days of Zerubbabel to the supposed birth of Christ. This, of course, would not agree with the Christian narrative. There is also a prophecy within the book of Hosea that states there will be an extended period of time during the last exile where the children of Israel will be without a king. Hosea 3, 4, and 5. For the Israelites will live many days without king or prince, without sacrifice or sacred stones, without ephod or teraphim. Afterward the Israelites will return and seek Yahuwah their Elohim and David their king. They will come trembling to Yahuwah and to his blessings in the end of days. This prophecy by Hosea states that the final period of Israelite history before the end of days will be both without a king and without a sacrifice. According to Christians, Christ is simultaneously the king and the sacrifice. Once again, this belief contradicts the words of the Creator. Hosea also tells us who the king will be in the end of days. David, not Christ. David, who is descended from the line of Judah, will serve as the king in the end of days, which agrees with what is mentioned in Genesis 49. The word used in verse 10, Shiloh, is rooted in the Hebrew word shalom, meaning peace. This is what the true Messiah, David, will establish in the last days. We can verify this in Isaiah chapter 11. A shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse, from his roots a branch will bear fruit. The spirit of Yahuwah will rest on him. The spirit of wisdom and of understanding, the spirit of counsel and of might. The spirit of the knowledge and fear of Yahuwah, and he will delight in the fear of Yahuwah. This stump of Jesse is again referring to David, as Jesse is his father. Quick side note. This section cannot be a prophecy about Christ, because this section mentions this individual will practice the fear of Yahuwah, and will delight in the fear of Yah. If this is referring to Christ, and Christ is supposedly simultaneously God, would he be practicing the fear of himself? Continuing to verse 6. The wolf will live with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the goat, the calf and the lion and the yearling together, and a little child will lead them. The cow will feed with the bear, their young will lie down together, and the lion will eat straw like the ox. The infant will play near the cobra's den, and the young child will put its hand into the viper's nest. They will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain, for the earth will be filled with the knowledge of Yahuwah as the waters cover the sea. This section is clearly describing a time of eternal world peace, which is the Shiloh, or Shalom, that is mentioned in Genesis 49. This is what the true final Messiah, David, will establish. Verse 10. In that day the root of Jesse will stand as a banner for the peoples. The nations will rally to him, and his resting place will be glorious. This king, David, will also gather all nations who will seek him, which also points back to Genesis 49. And the obedience of the nations shall be his. Genesis 49:10 is outlining how all rulers within the land of Israel will be descended from Judah, even until the end of days, when David will serve as the king which all nations of the earth will obey during an eternal period of world peace. Also in Genesis is another quote-unquote prophecy that Christianity infers is about their New Testament character. Genesis 22:8. And Abraham said, My son, Elohim will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering, so they went both of them together. In this chapter, Abraham is preparing to sacrifice his son Isaac, as he was commanded to, by the Creator. Unbeknownst to Abraham, this was simply a test by Yahuwah to see how loyal Abraham truly was to him. To Christians, this lamb that is mentioned serves as a symbol for Christ as the Lamb of God, and how he was sent as an offering for sin on mankind's behalf. There are a few issues that the Christian interpretation of this section runs into. For one, the sacrifice mentioned in this chapter was specified to be strictly for a burnt offering. Within the New Testament narrative, Christ never offered himself as a burnt offering, nor was that idea even considered. Also, this lamb in Genesis actually turned out to be a ram, which was sacrificed the exact same way that was mentioned in verse 8. We can read about this only 5 verses down, in Genesis 22:13. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in a thicket by his horns, and Abraham went and took the ram, and offered him up for a burnt offering in the stead of his son. This minor prophecy by Abraham had already been fulfilled within the same day. This lamb, or ram, in Genesis is not symbolic, nor does it have anything to do with the New Testament Messiah. This is the problem with the Christian belief system. It relies on both selective reading and the ignoring of context in order to insert their character into the Hebrew scriptures. Lastly, we'll have to cover the concept of what is called types and shadows. In a Christian theological context, types and shadows refers to Old Testament figures, events, or objects that seem to prefigure or foreshadow New Testament realities, especially those related to Christ. Essentially, the type is a historical event or person that symbolizes a greater truth or future reality, while the shadow is a less than perfect representation of that reality. Types and shadows are seen as prophetic depictions where the Creator revealed himself progressively to his people in a way that was suitable to their spiritual maturity. These types and shadows allegedly point towards the ultimate fulfillment of his plan, in Christ. Some examples include the bronze serpent of Moses being a type of Christ, hanging on the cross, the Sabbath rest day being the type of rest that Christians find in Christ, the Passover lamb being a type of Christ, for the ultimate sacrifice of sin, and the 30 pieces of silver mentioned in Zechariah 11 alluding to the price of Christ's betrayal, among other examples. This is part of the problem. The Christian faith always resorts to inserting its Messiah into the Hebrew Scriptures wherever they see fit. Then it attempts to pass these off as truths, even though the truth is something that both sides can clearly observe and agree on. It will never be true because the truth is always objective. The Hebrew Scriptures never objectively state that Christ is the promised Messiah. Of course, they have the right to believe these things, but they don't have the right to claim they're objectively true. Christianity resorts to creating this types and shadows method as an excuse for this New Testament character not being present within the Hebrew Scriptures. Christ is nowhere to be found within what is called the Old Testament. His existence would be a total contradiction of the words, actions, and prophecies of the Creator within the Tanakh. If the Old Testament supposedly serves as a foundation for the New Testament, and Christ isn't present in the Old Testament, then the New Testament no longer has a solid foundation to stand upon to be regarded as a valid source of writing. Again, there are also no prophecies that point to a New Testament Messiah within the Hebrew Scriptures. The main prophecies that are argued are either mistranslations, misinterpretations, or just completely taken out of context. The only reason that someone would think there are prophecies that point to a Christ figure is because they read the Old Testament from a New Testament point of view. In order for Christianity to exist within the Old Testament, you would have to repeatedly take the words of the Creator out of context. Once one reads the entire Tanakh, from Genesis to Malachi, in order and in context, without any outside biases or opinions, they will realize that the New Testament does not agree with it at all. The whole Christian belief system will fall apart.